Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cork Institute of Technology, and in particular to the Space Studies Programme 2017. On behalf of the host site, I would like to welcome you all, and also in particular the participants, the 120 or so who are in the middle row here, who are with us for the next 9 weeks. Learning all about the global space industry, and I think already finding it hyper exciting from what I have seen. So that's really nice. A couple of brief announcements, first of all, before I introduce our speaker this evening. There are 3 emergency exits in the unlikely event that we need to exit. There's a series of them over here, signed by green, 2 little green signs. There's the way you, or most of you at least, came in, which is behind you, and in the true tradition of an airline stewardess or whatever, or steward, come to think of it, over here on the left as well. There are toilet facilities at the back for those of you who may need them. Also, I would ask you to turn your mobile phones to silent. If you do want to tweet or whatever, of course, please feel free to do so. But try to at least do that as relatively silently as possible. And just one other small thing, while obviously we all like to take video nowadays and so on, just be aware of the personal space of the people around you, and that we don't that they don't just end up looking at your camera the whole time, the screen of your camera. So if you do take some pictures, just be aware of that. So it's my great pleasure. My name is Niall Smith. I am Head of Research here at CIT. I'm also fortunate enough to be the lead host individual for SSP17. That means almost nothing, however, because it's an enormous team effort and somebody has to stand out the front, and that's me tonight. So I would like to thank my colleagues, but I'm not going to go into a list of that, for all their help, with the exception of pointing out that our host site coordinator, Elizabeth Carroll Toomey, is in the audience with us tonight. So as you will notice, and I think it's great credit to our speaker tonight, Dan Tanney, that he has crossed out the original speaker's name. And I think that sense of humour sets the tone for this evening's Soffin Memorial Lecture. This is one of the key lectures of the Space Studies programme, and it's always given by somebody who has achieved a significant amount in the space arena, and Dan Tanney is certainly an individual who does that. So Dan, obviously, is an astronaut. He has a 16-year career as a NASA astronaut, flying on 2 space missions, 132 days in space, 6 spacewalks, and something that's kind of nice for all of us, the round numbers, the 100th spacewalk on the International Space Station. He was born in Pennsylvania. He now lives with his 3 children and his wife, who is from Cork, as many of you may know. He lives in Tokyo. Dan was the Grand Marshal for the St. Patrick's Day Cork Parade in 2009. And that was a really interesting event, I have to say. And he is also a patron recently of Blackrock Castle Observatory. So we're very pleased to have him as such, and really appreciate his advocacy of STEM and also the arts and culture, as well as an integral part of the world that we live in. Dan has many awards, in fact so many that I'm not going to read them out, but he now is a faculty member at the American School in Japan, where he teaches high school and middle school science, technology and design. Before that, he was the Vice President for Cargo and Mission Operations at Orbital ATK, a Washington, D.C. based company. And prior to that, he had a job as an astronaut. So I have the great pleasure of welcoming for the Soffin Memorial Lecture and our friend and colleague, Dan Tanney. So.
Thanks, Niall. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, in what has got to be the epitome of big shoes to fill, those of you who came expecting to hear from Dr. Aldrin, you were as disappointed as I was, who wanted to come and hear from him, but unfortunately he was not able to make it, as you all know, and with my association with Black Rock Castle and my being here anyway for my family vacation, I'm pleased to fill in and hopefully learning about my story will be at least partially as inspirational as hearing from Dr. Aldrin, and hopefully at some point you'll be able to hear from him at some later date. But I'll spend some time tonight mainly talking about my career and what it's like to live in space, and talk about what some of my feelings about the space industry and where we're going. I guess I would like to start a little bit, since this was supposed to be Buzz's night, talking a little bit about Buzz. Of course, everybody knows he was on Apollo 11, the lunar lander pilot, and second person to walk on the moon. But there's other things that are very important to us as astronauts. We see him quite a bit. He's very active in the former astronaut community, and he was a West Point grad at which is the United States' Army military academy, and then he flew for the Air Force as a pilot in the Air Force. Buzz is known academically as one of the real creators of how to rendezvous two things that are in orbit at the same time, which is critical. Not only for going to the moon, we had to know how to rendezvous two space objects so that we could transfer crew from the command module to the lunar lander and back. But very critical what we do now, which is go to the space station. And you have to launch things in parts, and then you have to figure out how to get them together when they're going thousands and thousands of miles an hour. Dr. Aldrin, Buzz, he did his research in two-body rendezvous. He's also very well known in the EVA world, the spacewalk world, and doing spacewalks was another technique that we had to perfect if we were going to go to the moon. Not only getting out of the lunar lander to go explore the moon, but in a contingency, getting outside of the spacecraft to fix something that might need fixing. And again, Buzz he's credited with figuring out that we need to train spacewalkers in a big swimming pool so that we can be what's called neutrally buoyant. We can float, we can put weights and floats on a spacesuited person so that they don't sink to the bottom of the pool, and so they can practice doing spacewalks. The early spacewalks, both in Russia and in the United States, were what we think of now as very dangerous and inefficient because they didn't train for them properly. And Buzz learned created ways to effectively train for spacewalks. He's most recently known as a very vocal advocate for going back to Mars, and so this is I don't have the passion that he has for getting back to the moon, getting back to Mars, or going to Mars. Going to Mars. And so, fortunately, or hopefully, you will be able to hear from him firsthand about his opinions about going back to Mars. I learned something very interesting when I was doing some research on Buzz, and as I said, his doctorate thesis was all about two-body rendezvous, and he got did his doctoral thesis in '63. The title of which is Line of Sight Guidance Techniques for Manned Orbital Rendezvous. That's still how we rendezvous the space shuttle to the space station, for instance. It is a visual rendezvous, and it is not obvious, and the techniques that he developed are still in use today. But what's really interesting is he had a dedication in 1963 that reads, in the hopes that this work may in some way contribute to the exploration of space, this is dedicated to crew members of the country's present and future manned space programs, if I could only join them in their exciting adventures. And he was selected to be an astronaut later that year. So he had he had a definite goal and good foresight. And really, I would like everybody to know that Buzz, even though big as a personality as he is, really contributed to the real techniques and the real math, the real understanding of how things in space work. Okay, so hopefully you'll all be able to hear him firsthand at some point, but now you have to hear about me. So I really like to start my story with this picture. This is my father and my mother, Henry and Rose Taney, and that little cute little guy is not me. That's my oldest brother, Richard. And this picture is great for a variety of reasons. It looks like, if you look at it out of context, it's a couple and a young family, maybe after church or maybe going on vacation. But when you understand this picture in context, it's a much different story. And the context is this picture is taken in the middle of a desert in Utah, behind barbed wire, and with my family living in barracks, because during World War II, all people of Japanese ancestry, my parents were born in California, but all people of Japanese ancestry that lived on the West Coast were forcibly removed from their house and moved to the interior of the country and kept behind barbed wire for years, including my parents, for the simple, I'm not going to call it crime, but for the simple reason that their ancestry is Japanese and the Japanese had just attacked America. And at that time, it was felt to be very unusual to be Japanese. They were a society that we Americans just didn't understand, and we thought that the fanatic devotion to the emperor would be passed down in generations, and Japanese Americans just couldn't be trusted, honestly. And so I look at this picture, and I see my dad in a tie and my mom in her dress and with the pretty shoes, and I think, I honestly don't think that I would have the dignity that they exemplify in this picture. And many things have happened since then, and America actually issued a public apology to the Japanese Americans. And I am so proud of both my family and my country to survive such a black mark in our history. It really is an important part of my story. And I'm hopeful that the lessons that we, at least Americans, I think had learned about what it means to be an American and what it means to be different, I'm hopeful that those lessons are learned and deeply learned, because I'm starting to see signs of losing that lesson nowadays, and I hope that we can remember that this important lesson that we survived. The irony, the beautiful irony of this story, I think, is that my parents had all of their cameras and their radios confiscated because they were not trusted with cameras and radios back then. But yet, one generation later, that same government spent a lot of money teaching me how to use cameras and radios. And so I find that irony fulfilling, both for my family and for my country. After the war, after a couple years, they moved first to St. Louis, which is in the middle of the country, and then later to Philadelphia, which is on the East Coast. And that's where I was born, so this time I am the cute little guy in the picture. After that, they moved to Chicago, and 6 months after they moved to Chicago, my father passed away when I was 4 years old. So leaving my mother with 2 in college, 2 in high school, and me just in 4-year-old. So it's a spoiler alert, but you know, my mom's my hero, and she should be everybody's hero. She was a great woman. A lot of people find out I'm an astronaut, and they go, gee, did you always want to be an astronaut? Did you know when you were 7 years old that you wanted to be an astronaut? And really, the answer in my case is really no. I had many other professional dreams when I was a young boy. First, of course, I wanted to be a cowboy, and I was a good shot. Growing up in Chicago, which does not have a lot of cows, that was kind of limiting. What I really loved to do is play baseball, and I really wanted to be a professional baseball player. All of my heroes when I was a child are professional baseball players. I would probably have gone pro eventually in my career, except that I have no talent playing baseball, which turns out to be a limiting factor. But I did love the game. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing, what I would consider my biggest hobby when I was a child, was building model rockets, building and flying model rockets. And these model rockets are made of wood and paper, and you paint them and glue them together, and then you could stick an engine in them, a chemical engine in them, and you hook it up to a battery, and you press a button, and it goes, and it can go 1,000 feet in the air, 300 meters in the air, which is really amazing. And I loved the power of holding the button, pressing the button, and making something go so fast and so high. And I started to imagine, what is it like up there? What can it see? You used to be able to buy an actual camera that would go on the thing and try to take the picture from up there. And I could never afford the camera, but I would always wonder, what does it look like from up there? And what does it feel like? Because you could put insects in the rocket, and you could give them the ride of their life. And you wonder what it felt like for them. And so that probably sparked this whole interest in, wow, the exploration interest in me. What's it like? What does it look like up there? What's it feel like up there? And boy, I never would have had any clue that 30 years later, I'd get my picture in front of this rocket. And that's the Space Shuttle Endeavour. This is a couple hours after my first landing in 2001. And boy, a lot of things happened in those 30 years. So I graduated from high school. I went to university. I studied engineering, became a mechanical engineer. I worked for a couple aerospace companies. A couple things that are very relevant to this audience. One is that in 1987, I was at MIT doing my master's degree, and I was there over the summer, and a friend of mine that I worked with called me and said, hey, I'm going to be at MIT over the summer. Maybe we can get together. I said, sure, what are you going to do at MIT? He goes, there's this thing called International Space University, and I'm going to be in this class, and we're going to learn all about space for the summer. I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. And so my friend Gus was on the inaugural class of ISU 30 years ago, and what I thought was this wonderful idea, but maybe a one-off, has grown into this fantastic program. So I'm really thrilled to be back here for the 30th, and book me, I'll be here for the 60th. Probably the most critical thing that happened in this period was that I was given the opportunity that would really change my life forever. And to accept this opportunity would mean that I would have to face all of my fears, and that I would have to embrace danger instead of avoiding it. And I felt like I would be a surfer on a huge wave that at any moment in a millisecond, it could be disaster, but if I was able to focus and use my skills and balance correctly, I could just get the ride of my life. And so I decided that I would take the chance, and I did what very few men would have the nerve to do, and I married a Cork woman. So I'm a survivor. Oh, yeah, I became an astronaut, too. Jane is a Corkonian. She was born and raised in Douglas. For those of you that are out of the country, that's just a suburb here of Cork. You can almost walk there. She's schooled locally. She went to Rockborough Elementary, and then she's a Scolvera girl right here in the city. And so when I was single, I learned how to play golf, and I loved playing golf, and I went to one of these fabulous golf courses that had just opened out on a little peninsula in the middle of the Atlantic there, and she happened to be the business manager there, and I went to golf on an awful day. The rain and the wind were just, you could hardly walk from the car park to the clubhouse, and so I found that the scenery inside was better than the scenery outside, and about 18 months later, we were married. That was 17 years ago. Okay, but you're here for the astronaut thing, not for the me golfing thing. So in my career as an astronaut for 16 years, I've had the pleasure of being on 2 space missions. It's a little confusing because I wear 3 patches. My first mission was in 2001 on the Space Shuttle Endeavour. We call it STS-108. We delivered 3 members of the space station crew to the space station. We brought 3 home. I got to do an EVA. It was an awesome introduction to space. My next mission was actually 2 missions. One was the launch, which was on STS-120, that's Space Shuttle Discovery, and I launched with this crew. And we went to the space station, and then because that's the way we would rotate crews back then. I would get off on the space station and become a member of the space station crew, and then they would return the guy that I was replacing. I know these pictures are small, but I did want to point out that the woman right in the middle, let's see if I can do this, right in the middle of this portrait is Pam Melroy. She was the second woman ever to command a space shuttle, and it was my honor to work under Pam. And then I got to the space station, and the commander of the space station was Peggy Whitson, the first woman ever to command the space station. They made a big deal out of the first woman shuttle commander and the first space station commander, but I had a woman boss on the space station and on the space shuttle. I had 2 daughters, my wife, my dog was a girl, my cat was a girl, and so I quickly learned my role, my position in life, and finally, years later, we had a son, so, you know, we're catching up. When I launched on the space shuttle, as you heard. We've retired the space shuttle in 2011, but the space shuttle was an amazing vehicle. As it sits on the pad, it's about 4.5 million pounds. It's a combination of solid and liquid propellant. The big 2 solid rocket motors on the side, the white are filled with solid propellant. They burn for a couple minutes, and then the orange tank back there holds liquid fuel that feeds the liquid engines on the space shuttle. I'm going to show you what a launch looks like just because it's so cool. And it is as cool as you think it is. This is, of course, out of Florida, the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Those are the 3 liquid engines, and then at 0, the solid rockets ignite. Check. Now this ride is as fun as you think it is. Everything is shaking like crazy. You are both focused on your instruments and your procedures, but also you've got half an eye out the window just taking in this incredible experience of being accelerated to orbital velocity. Here's the video of from the vehicle looking back down at Florida. If you're eagle eyes, you'll notice this was not my flight. I know that some of you are really smart about this, but they got much better video cameras in the crew compartment after I left, so I used those videos. So at 2 minutes and a couple seconds, we get the solid propellant is completed, and so we get rid of those solid rocket boosters, and there's a big flash in the window, and those things are separated. And they actually come back down and land on parachutes and are reused. So the liquid in that tank can feed those engines for about 6 more minutes. So from 2 minutes on the solid rocket boosters, another 6 minutes and so on the liquids, and we're going 17,500 miles an hour, from 0 to 17,000 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. It's a great ride. I recommend it for anybody who can get one. So in my era, we were going here, the space station, the International Space Station. The International Space Station is the most complex thing we've ever built in space. It's a consortium. The International Space Consortium is about 16 countries, all contributing either people, money, or equipment and modules to the project. From an engineering point of view, the most amazing thing about this, I think, is that those pieces are made in California and in Huntsville and in Russia and in Germany, and for the first time ever, they get put together in low Earth orbit. And so far, it all has worked perfectly. It's a fantastic machine and a real mark of success for such an international consortium. I'll show you a little bit about the the space station itself, when you look at it, it's really complex, but those big solar arrays collect the power, and then the thing that connects them, that we call it a truss, that's all outside. That's all collects and stores the power. There are tubes, I'll call them tubes, but there are modules that run up along a long corridor, and that's the living space. There's another picture here. These are the pressurized living compartments, and the rest of the stuff on the outside primarily has to do with getting power and rejecting heat. So once you get to the space station and dock with the space station, as a new guy on the space station, you have to learn an entirely new skill, a skill that you can't learn on the ground, and that's how to float from one end of the space station to the other. And the space station is large as spacecraft go, and I loved floating. I loved floating around. Not only is it fun to Superman around, but you see your room, the thing you're working in, completely differently. You don't see it as a floor or a ceiling. You see workspace everywhere. If you have to get down there, you don't bend over to reach down. You flip over and get it that way. I'm going to take you on a little tour from one end of the space station to the other when I was there. So it's grown a little bit bigger since I left. But I just want you to notice stuff like these bars. Those are called handrails, but we don't use them for our hands. We use them for our toes. And we put our feet under them so we can stabilize while we work. All sorts of equipment and cameras and computers. Our main interface to the space station is through laptop computers. This is ductwork that carries air back and forth because that you have to force the air around the space station. This is a storage module. Yeah, as I said, there's no floor or there's no ceiling on the space station, so anywhere your feet are is the down, and everywhere your head is up. We go through these hatches. This is a storage. We come into what's called the US segment, and that we have this is the pantry where we keep pens and wet wipes. There's a space suit and some emergency oxygen equipment there. And this is Peggy, my commander, working out on the treadmill. Pretty cool. You can bike and look out the window right below you and go around the world in 90 minutes. It's pretty good. That little door is her crew compartment, and then we go into what's called the Node 2, the new module that we had brought up on the space shuttle when I launched to the space station. Now, we added this new module to the space station, and like your house, if you put an addition to your house, it's not just the framing, but you have to go out and you have to hook up the electricity and the cooling and the internet, and a lot of that has to be done outside, which means that I'll say have to do spacewalks, but it's a real honor to be given spacewalks to do it. They're important work to do, and it's amazing to put the suit on and go through the hatch and hold on to the space station going 17,000 miles an hour and looking down at your toes, which are 2 feet away from you, and then 250 miles below you there goes Sicily, and then here comes the coast of California. Really an amazing experience. This is that module that we brought up called the Node 2, and Peggy and I had the job of hooking up all the cooling and electronics and other things that had to be done to properly hook up the module. When you see people doing spacewalks, the suits are bulky and they look pretty much the same, and you wonder, who's that? Is that Peggy or is that me? Well, there's two ways to tell Peggy from me when you see pictures of us on a spacewalk. The first is you can see that there's red stripes on her legs. She wore red stripes that signified that she was called EV1, and on the spacewalks she would always wear the red stripes. I had white stripes. The other way is that I'm the one with the ear-to-ear smile in my helmet, because it is so cool to do spacewalks. That you are your own satellite for that 6 or 7 hours. Everything you need is contained in your suit, and we have a safety tether, but it's just a metal wire that we use as our safety tether in case we let go of the space station. But then the rule number one of spacewalking is don't let go of the space station. So we never want to count on that safety wire. In my 4 months of living on the space station, probably the most pleasure I had was looking out the window at our beautiful planet. in 4 months, I took about 16,000 pictures of the Earth, and we only have time for about 12,000 tonight. So I better get going. This is a picture I took at a bittersweet moment in my mission. The Space Shuttle Discovery had brought me to the space station, and I was very close with that crew. They were really like family for me, and it was very difficult for me to see them go home and know that they're going to have fun and they're going to go on a post-flight tour of places and have fun together, and I would be on the space station. But however, of course, I was living on the space station, so it was bittersweet for me to see them go. But here's a picture of them leaving the space station here in the foreground, the beautiful Earth and its curvature in the background. This is a view out of my bedroom window, and nice view. And this is over the southern part of America. That water in the top part is the Gulf of Mexico, and so that means that bay is what's called Galveston Bay. And what that means is you might be able to see it here, but you can see some lines of major highways just below and to the right of that bay, and that's Houston, Texas. And Houston is where the Johnson Space Center is, and that's where all of the astronauts live and train. And there were moments when I was in my crew compartment on we call it the phone, but it's a computer way to talk to home, and I would go, hey, look at this, I can see Houston. And I got good at following the highways and figuring out where my neighborhood was. And it was, it's silly that because I could be anywhere, but it did make a connection, like, hey, I'm right over Houston, and it was really, it did make me feel a real sense of being home with my family. This is Chicago in the middle of the United States, and I was up in the winter of 2007, 2008, and America got a lot of snow that winter, which is miserable if you're in Chicago, but it's fantastic if you're in space, because the snow offers great contrast, and a day after a snowstorm, it's easy to see roads and buildings and lakes and rivers, and it's much easier to figure out the things that you're looking for. And so that's downtown Chicago, sort of on the bottom tip of Lake Michigan there. And it was much easier for me to go find familiar things that I was really looking for. My mom's house and Wrigley Field and the parts of Chicago that I really missed. At night, it's a whole different image. This is Chicago at night. The sort of curved boundary on the right is Lake Michigan. And what's unique about Chicago, I know you don't really care that much about Chicago, but is that it's unique in the world in that the street lights in Chicago, the city, are a different color than any of its suburban neighbors. And so you can see the political boundary of Chicago just because of the color of the street lights, which is really interesting to be able to see a political boundary from space. So that's very interesting. Down here, and I'll try to point it out, there's a black X, and that's pretty interesting. Down here, no, it doesn't show up here, but that's a small airport near the city of Chicago, and the airport is in the middle of a neighborhood. Of course, the neighborhood is all lit up, but of course the runways are not illuminated like the city, and so it's easy to see that airport. I would take a bunch of pictures, and then in the evening or the weekend, I would try to go through them, and you can't believe how many cities look alike, because most of them have a river running through them, and you're trying to figure out, where is this? Is this Louisville, Kentucky, or is this Seattle? But there are some hints to look for, and for this one, the big hint is and I'm sorry, I'll try to point out over here, but this funny-looking building that has 5 sides, and so that makes that the Pentagon. So Washington, D.C., and if you know Washington, D.C., over the bridge are all the federal buildings, the U.S. Capitol and the White House, etc. So that's an easy find, easy thing to figure out when you're looking at your pictures. This is in the Bahamas, and I think it's universal in the astronauts' opinion that if you can go over the Bahamas, you get to the window, because it is so beautiful. And it's almost always cloud-free. And what makes it incredibly beautiful is that the water in the Bahamas is crystal clear, and it's blue. and the sand floor of the ocean there is blazingly white. And what that means is that as waters flow through these islands, they cut smaller channels, or little deeper channels between them as the water flows through. And what it gives us as the lucky astronauts is an incredibly beautiful view of these different colored hues as the depth of the ocean is created by the water flowing through these islands. I think here's another picture of that. And it's such a beautiful sight to see. In fact, I even saw on Google Maps, they show these colors. If you take the global map, or Google Map, that world view, and it actually shows these colors, but fantastic thing to see. This is in South America. These are the glaciers of the Andes, and glaciers are snow and ice that fall, but then they don't melt. They're permanent. And the next season, more snow and ice falls, and they actually move. The glaciers move down the mountains to the fjords or to the rivers or to the ocean, and as they move, probably a couple inches a year, they pick up sediment and rocks. Sediment and rocks, and that's what creates these lines, these striations. And it's, again, for the lucky few of us that have been able to see it from space, makes for quite a beautiful view. And at the face of the glacier in the lower right there, you can see as the glacier calves off, these icebergs then float away, so you can actually see some of the icebergs floating away. This is in Central Australia. I am not a geologist, so I can't tell you what creates these beautiful patterns and colors, but when you look at the Earth and see these incredibly beautiful views, it fills me with this pride of citizenship of the planet, because we live in an incredibly beautiful planet. And this is just a great example. There's this, looks like erosion kind of lines. There's a lake in the middle that's evaporating because you can see the minerals around the edge of the lake. And then just over here, a completely different texture. And again, I can't explain, I don't know really what it is, but to look out the window and feel like that's my planet, I'm from there, was really fulfilling to me. And I wish I could take everybody up to see how beautiful our planet is, because my sense was I raised my citizenship awareness out of country and to planet. And it's more important to me that I'm a citizen of the planet, than I'm a citizen of any other political boundary. And I feel like that would be valuable for all of us to feel. Okay, so I know you all want to go, what's Ireland look like? Did you see Ireland? And of course I wanted to see Ireland, right? My in-laws are here, and it's one of my favorite places, and so I was up there for 120 days, so pretty much every day went to the window and took a picture of Ireland, and pretty much this is what I saw. You have a lot of clouds in Ireland. But no kidding, and you know, I have in-laws here, so I had a to-do list. And no kidding, about day 112 into my mission, out of 120, we finally got some clear weather in Ireland. Thank goodness, because I don't think I could have landed. And so here are a couple views. This is one of my favorite. This is a night view. And so I'm going to try to show it here, but this is both Ireland and England, the UK. And so this right in the middle, the brighter part right in the middle is Dublin, okay, and the southern part is down to your lower and sort of middle of the screen. The unique-looking, spaceship-looking light down that sort of looks like it's got like a flying saucer, that's Cork. Cork has a very unique look from space also, because the lights along the river make it look elongated. I can pretend that I know where Kinsale is. That's where my in-laws live. But you can see the other bright lights. That's Limerick and Galway, Belfast up there. And then across the sea, of course, Manchester, big lit up. And then, of course, London is huge, the big light there. Sorry you can't see it in that one, but all of England there. Anyway, a beautiful view of both England and Ireland. During the day, here's one of the few pictures I got of pretty much the whole island of Ireland in one glimpse. And again, I won't point it out, but you know, the whole rugged west coast, and then Dublin, and then the southern coast. And then as a little bit closer look, that nub that you can see moving to the right, that's the Old Head. Once you find the Old Head, then it's easy to find Kinsale and Cork Harbor. And for those of you visiting Cork, it's a beautiful place to visit. You're lucky to have a 9-week visit here. And but it was awesome for me to be able to finally see my second home from space and get some good pictures. I'm going to show you some brief movies. Funny, they're not movies because the movie cameras aren't good enough to capture this stuff. So the technique that's been developed is to take still pictures with a really high-resolution camera and then stitch them together in a movie. But this is going to go fast. And I'll try to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing, but I just want you to get the sense of what it's like. Now, this is much faster than real life, but for me, it brings back the experience of looking out the window and seeing the Earth. So here we're going to fly down the west coast of North America, of America. And so if you know it, that's Vancouver and Seattle, and then the next big lights will be San Francisco. Okay, and then down the coast, that big light is Los Angeles. There's Las Vegas going right down the middle. Okay, and there's a thing called Baja California as we go down into Mexico. But look at the lightning storms from space, and it is that spectacular, and it is that cool to look at. This is Mexico and South America, Central America, and as we fly down, sort of Central America will come back into our view, and we'll fly over South America. The Andes Mountains here, the clouds are coming in from the west and are not high enough to peak the mountains, and so they're stopped at the mountains, and you have a dry side and a wet side of South America. But that's the experience that I would have, and it was so addictive to look out the window, especially lightning storms were spectacular to watch. Here's another sequence put together after I got there, because we didn't have cameras of this quality when I was there, but these are exposed so that you can actually see the star field. And again, you'll see lightning storms and the land going by, but if you think about it, the space station is going around the Earth, and the Earth is turning, and so the star fields appear to be moving, but of course it's just we and the space station and the Earth that are turning inside of what we call an inertial field, that the stars really aren't moving, but from our perspective, it looks like they're moving. But a beautiful view. Okay, I lived in space for 4 months, and so that means that for 4 months, I had to do everything that you would have to do for 4 months, and it includes mundane stuff like cutting my hair. And we have a special hair clippers there that's battery operated, but it's attached to a tube that's attached to the vacuum cleaner, because if you were to cut your hair without a vacuum assist, then those million pieces of little hair would go everywhere, and you would be the least popular guy on the space station. My hair is pretty thick, and I didn't know it, and I blocked the tube. And my hair went everywhere in the space station, and I was the least popular guy. And I spent, no kidding, 2 weekend days cleaning up my bits of hair in the new module, because it was my responsibility to clean up after myself. This is my little bedroom. Okay, we call it a crew compartment. Now, for you adults, it's about the size of a phone booth. Okay, and for you kids, a phone booth is one of these things that you had to go into to make a phone call on the street, and it was about this big. And but it's just big enough for us and our personal stuff, and we'd hang up a sleeping bag. Of course, I could have slept with my head going the other way, because you can sleep any way you want. Sleeping in space is fantastic. There's no pressure on your body, and so I loved sleeping in space. You can see some of my personal things in there. I have a computer so I can do email and watch movies, and I have some trinkets for my kids, and there's a toothbrush and a toothpaste there, because we don't have a sink in space, because if you think of it, the only way that water knows to go down the sink is because there's gravity here, and so we don't have a sink in space, And so for 120 days, I brushed my teeth a couple times a day and used the water in the little silver bag right above it there, and I'd rinse out my mouth, and then I would swallow my toothpaste because there's no place to spit it. So I did an interview a couple weeks before I landed, and they said, "What are you looking forward to when you get back to Earth? What do you really want to do?" And I said, "I really want to spit out my toothpaste." And it wasn't pleasant to swallow your toothpaste every day. The funny thing is, when I finally got back to Earth and I brushed my teeth and I spit my toothpaste out in the sink, it's amazing. That stuff goes into the sink and it stays there, which was unbelievable to me. I almost called my wife over. Look, it's just staying in the sink, because you get used to seeing things float so often that when you see gravity working, it's like a magic show. Lots of people are interested in what and how we eat, so I've got a little movie clip here. The red food is contributed by the Russians, and the blue food is contributed by the US. We're allowed to eat whatever we want, and both types of food are delicious. The Russians provide a lot of freeze-dried kind of food and a lot of canned food. We generally have food that is pre-made and in packs that you just warm up. But I'm making a little soup. You can see our dining room table there with our scissors and our spoons all tied to it so it won't float away. The water dispenser is easier to get to if you stand on the wall than if you stand on the floor. But it dispenses hot water or lukewarm water and a certain volume, and you inject it into the bag and wait a couple minutes. And the Russian bags are cool because they have a built-in straw on the other end, and then you can just suck the soup out. Again, there's our dining room table. Peggy and Yuri Malenchko is my other crewmate while I was on the space station. He's a Russian cosmonaut, a very experienced cosmonaut and a great guy. But he has mastered the art of zero-G. Yuri, this was his, I believe, his third flight with me, and he has flown 2 more times since then, just landed. He's a great guy. Okay, well, everybody wants to know, so I might as well cover it. Go into the bathroom, and if you ever want to appreciate gravity in your life, think about it in the bathroom, because without gravity, everything floats, okay? And so what we use is vacuum, where you would use gravity to pull the waste away from your body. So that tube with the yellow funnel, you take the cap off the funnel, you turn that valve, which is right below it, and then a fan turns on and pulls air through the tube, and that's how liquid waste is pulled away from your body. And then the lid there, that white thing, you press the button, it opens up, it's pretty much a commode, and then the air gets sucked into that thing too, and it pulls the solid waste away from your body, and it just does work awesome. And if you ever want to stop all work on the space station, break this thing, because 6 people will do nothing but try to fix it, because it is a critical piece of equipment. But it works, it does work great, and it's one of the big fears of first-time flyers. How's the toilet going to work? And the thing works great, and your body works great too. So, but it's a great piece of equipment. Now, I kind of want to fast forward a little bit about thinking about the future of space, because if we're going to go to Mars, Mars is a long trip. Okay, Mars is probably 4 years total mission, something like that. That's a long time, and that's a lot of consumables. That's a lot of things that you're going to need. That's a lot of food and a lot of socks, right? And so we are developing technologies, no kidding, that will allow us to go further than low Earth orbit, further than the moon. And one of those critical technologies is life support, okay? And I have an example of critical life support. So we get to drink our coffee. You know what coffee does. We can't throw that water away. We cannot. There's too much water. So now we recycle it. And we have what's called regenerative life support. And we have a machine that takes our waste urine and processes it, and we get about 80% of that water back, and it turns into drinking water, no kidding. And we're going to need to do that if we're going to go to Mars or some other farther place out. We cannot carry enough water with us to go to these far-off places. In fact, we're going to have to get a lot better than 80% in terms of regenerative life support. It's not just water; it's oxygen. It's get the humidity out of the air. That air. There's all sorts of things that we're going to have to be really smart about if we're going to go further than low Earth orbit. This is just a fun little clip. This is Leland Melvin. He's got a great story. He was an American football player, professional, and then he got injured. He went back and got his master's degree and then became an astronaut. So he's got a great story to tell. But I'm showing him, this is his first flight when he came to pick me up, and I'm showing him my favorite snack up there, which was tortillas with peanut butter and some chocolate candy. If you take that water in that bag and you squeeze it gently, you can get this great physics experiment. Look at the ball of water, and there are air bubbles floating inside the water, right? Because there's no buoyancy. And then, if you're really careful, you can use the surface tension of the water to capture small objects like candy. But look at the dynamics of a free-flying ball of water. And if the commander shows up, you can swallow the evidence. So I flew for, my second mission was 120 days, and the Space Shuttle Atlantis came and picked me up, and I finally got to come home. It was, again, a bittersweet time for me. Watching gravity come back into my life as we landed on the shuttle was cool, but I knew that it was unlikely that I was going to be able to live in zero-G again. But in this view, I'm lying down, actually, in a special seat on the downstairs part of the Space Shuttle. Space Shuttle was an amazing vehicle. It launched from Florida, the Kennedy Space Center. It would go about 5 million miles in about 2 weeks, and then it would come and land 3 miles from where it took off. And then they would reprocess it, roll it that 3 miles out again, launch it again. An amazing vehicle. If you ever get to America, there's a couple places where you can go see the actual space shuttles. But about 5 hours after I landed, after 120 days in space, finally got to go see what I'd been waiting for. And there's Jane, and I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time I went to space. So 120 days in space, and this was definitely the best one. So, but that was, gosh, 8, 9 years ago. So many of you in here are our future in terms of space. So what's next? What are we doing? What is there to do in space? After we retire the space shuttle, what are we doing? Well, in America, NASA is designing a new spacecraft called the Orion, and its mission is not exactly known, but we want to go further than low Earth orbit. We want to go maybe to the moon or further. And so we're working on that, and we're working on a very large rocket that will take it there. Okay? Or we have companies that are building spacecraft or vehicles that can take you up to almost orbit and give you a great ride. And there's a whole industry there, and it's starting to really thrive. It's really starting to take place. Some countries are building rockets and flying them very successfully. New Zealand just launched their own rocket a couple weeks ago with great success. And so other countries that are new to the space game are emerging and producing things that are really functional. I mean, they had a very successful flight. Well, where are we going to go? Well, some people think we should go back to the moon. Okay, we should use that as a place to learn how to live on a different terrestrial surface. Okay, I don't really have strong feelings, but that's one of the places that we could go. And the advantage is it's pretty close. It's only a couple days away. There are some people that want to go to an asteroid, which is further away. It would take longer to get to. And we could go get some samples of the universe that have been billions of miles away and see what that tells us and give us experience in capturing something, obviously not walking on the surface, but going and rendezvousing with a large mass, a large rock like that. And I would say that everybody wants to go to Mars. So the real discussion point probably is, what's the path there? Do we go to the moon first, or should we not? It's a discussion I don't really have an opinion on, but that's really the ultimate goal, is to get on a different planet and go to Mars. Okay, well, the other thought I wanted to, so that's sort of where we're going, and I believe that the industry is headed that way. That's going to happen, okay? And once we, in America at least, once we stop flying the space shuttle, there was a real feeling that the space program is over. I, no kidding, had people saying, well, now what do you do now that the space program is over? Well, we stopped launching people from America, but our space program was not over. And, well, people point to and say all the time, well, I can't believe we're stuck in low Earth orbit, right? Now, this is just qualitative, meaning I don't really give numbers to these graphs, but I just kind of want to show you, you know, in the 60s, early 60s, we were in low Earth orbit. In the 70s, we went to the moon, which is 250,000 miles away, okay? But then, after the moon program was over, we stayed in low Earth orbit. So we've been hundreds of miles away from Earth for the past 30 or 40 years, okay? But I say this is the wrong metric to measure our success in or our progress in. And I say a better metric to use is something like mission duration, where even going to the moon was 10 days or 12 days or so. We had a space station called Skylab, and there were 3 missions to Skylab. There was a 30-day mission, a 45-day mission, and an 80-day mission, which was unbelievable at the time. But now, on the International Space Station, we're sending people up there for routinely 180 days, 6 months, and in some cases, Scott Kelly was up there for over 300 days. The ability for us to survive in space has grown a huge amount in the last 30 years, and we're going to need that technology to get to Mars. And I say, for this group, just as importantly, the number of nations that are involved in getting to space, either with astronauts or space programs, or contributing technologies and companies to space, is growing just as quickly, and that's exciting. That's exciting that we're involving so many of the world's countries. And I would hope that in the next day or week or so, we could add Ireland to this list, that Ireland can be a significant contributor to the space program, and I think just having ISU here this year will help do that. So I say the space program is thriving. I think that even though we're not launching rockets from America with people on them, we are progressing the knowledge base so that we can go further and further. So what can you do? You're Ireland, or you're, I don't know, Bolivia or Peru. What can you do? How can I contribute to space? Well, you know, rockets, of course, are the most visible thing, but a rocket program is not a space program. You need rockets, but it's not mandatory that your country has rockets. Anybody with about $10,000 now can build a satellite, which is unbelievable, and a functional satellite that does real things. These are called CubeSats. You can order a kit, and you can program it and do whatever you want to it, and it fits in this 4x4 centimeter square or multiples of it. And then if you're lucky enough, you can get a ride. And high schools are building satellites and getting them launched. Universities are. And they are functional satellites. So now you can get into space for very little money. The problem is finding a launch, but you can do that. Okay? There's a huge business now in getting images from space and using it for something really interesting. So there's a company that's going to be taking photographs of the Earth at regular intervals, daily intervals, and selling that data. So, for instance, you want to build a grocery store, and you think it might be good over at this intersection, but you want to know what the traffic's like. What is the other grocery store? How many cars are at that grocery store every Tuesday? And you can get that data pretty soon with these companies that are putting satellites up there and taking pictures of the Earth at regular intervals. And maybe you're a company that takes that data and puts it all together and sells the information in those pictures to companies that are looking for that kind of thing. We're going to go to space, and we're going to be, I don't know, claiming things, or things are going to happen. And we're going to have to talk about space law. We're going to have to talk about who owns things or who's liable when you're out there. And so you don't have to be a space scientist to participate in this thought. We're going to have to figure these problems out. You know, stuff like food, right? The astronauts, food is critical to us, not only for nourishment, but for morale. Mealtime is a big morale boost. And I just had a thought that clothing is sort of a waste in space. And really, if you're going to go to Mars and it's going to take you a year to get there, do you really need a year's worth of clothes? Or maybe your clothes have to have some other purpose after you're done using them, or something. Somebody's got to think about that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's lots of ways I think that countries, companies, industries can contribute to the space program without having to build a rocket or build a satellite. So I thought that Ireland is well positioned for some of these things. I want to leave you just with my latest gig, and I want to maybe implore some of you that are already in the industry or that enjoy space and space science, and that is, I decided last year that I felt that I wanted to contribute to society in a more direct way, and for a variety of reasons, we moved to Japan, and now I teach high school, and it's really been a great experience for me to try to bring the excitement of space, not just for an hour,